When Fred VanVleet told his teammates, let's fight through this BS, he was talking about the refs. So Ben Taylor was like, oh, I'll show you BS, and gave him a technical foul. Now, to be fair, you can get a tech for disagreeing with a call, but it normally takes a lot more than that. Remember when LeBron acted like his dog died? No tech, but VanVleet was talking to his own teammates.
I mean, I don't mind. I'll take a fine. I don't really care. I thought Ben Taylor was terrible tonight. It's been disappointing this season. You could look up most of my texts this year have been with Ben Taylor officiating. So at a certain point as a player, you feel it's personal.
But is he right? Sure enough, VanVleet has 8 technical fouls this year. 5 of them are with Ben Taylor on the floor, and some are just ridiculous. Like when OG Anunoby was called for a foul, VanVleet tosses the ball to the stanchion, then to the ref. Ben Taylor calls a tech for delay of game. Seriously. Nick Nurse can't believe what he saw. Taylor doesn't always give the tech, but he is on the crew. In this one, Fred claps and says, come on, man, to the ref, and gets ejected. So VanVleet is right. If Ben Taylor is officiating, he is much more likely to get a tech. But why? The first thing people say is fixing games. The NBA had a scandal where one of their refs, Tim Donaghy, was involved in illegal gambling. He was caught and sent to prison, but when he got out, Donaghy gave a different motive for bad calls, not gambling. In a book, he said Allen Iverson had threatened a ref. Officials thought AI should get suspended, but he only got a $25,000 fine. So the refs got revenge themselves. Although Iverson carries the ball all the time and is never called, we were going to enforce traveling against him that night. So was it personal? Absolutely. They would make life tougher for players they have a personal grudge against. The refs had a list of players they didn't like. Donaghy says that included Gary Payton, Rasheed Wallace, Antoine Walker, Chauncey Billups, and Steven Jackson. Whenever refs called their games, it was personal. The referees would sometimes make a wager among themselves. First ref to give one of the bad boys a technical foul wouldn't have to tip the ball boy that night. Wonderful. Sometimes it's an entire team. A guy who works for the Grizzlies didn't believe this whole conspiracy thing. Then a friend said, oh, that official has a beef with our assistant coach.
I promise you, you will see something tonight you have never seen in your life. I was like, whatever, dude. Game's about to start. Mark Davis walks over and puts up the tech sign. Delay a game, Memphis late to the tip. And I looked down and I went, oh my God. And he's like, I told you. And so I would just warn Fred VanVleet, these guys got egos now.
But of course they have egos. One time a ref called a foul on Rasheed Wallace for staring at him.
Whack! Get out!
This guy, Joey Crawford, once teed up Matt Barnes for trying to hand him the ball. He teed up Tim Duncan for laughing on the bench. But the NBA finally cracked down on their own wrath. David Stern suspended Joey Crawford and sent him to a psychologist. He would tell me, Joe, if you feel the anger coming on, just do something with your hands. Put them by your side or behind your back. Keep reminding yourself, calm down, calm down. If somebody's getting on me about a bad call, he'd remind me, slow your breathing down. Remind yourself, you're a good ref. So obviously refs are human. They've got emotions like the rest of us. They have personal grudges. But that's not the conspiracy. The most hated ref is Scott Foster. Many players have called him out for having a big ego. Chris Paul has lost 14 straight playoff games with him reffing, but there's a forgotten controversy about Scott Foster he still carries around today. Between October 2006 and April 2007, Donaghy called Scott Foster 134 times. That was the same period when Donaghy admitted to betting on games. The only other person he called more was Thomas Martino, who he was actually giving illegal picks to. You might say, oh, a ref calling another ref, no big deal, they're friends. Even if it was 134 times. Well, the most calls he made to a different ref, not Scott Foster, was 13 times. So that's 150 calls to give illegal picks to a bookie, 134 calls to Scott Foster, 13 to other refs. Now, I'm not saying Scott Foster did anything. These are just the facts.
It's the facts.
But you would think the NBA wants to investigate that, right? So the FBI called Commissioner David Stern and had a meeting telling him every detail about Tim Donaghy. But that was a mistake. The NBA leaked the story to reporters before Donaghy could wear a wire and prove the full extent of the corruption. Stern went out of his way to call Donaghy a rogue, isolated criminal working on his own, even though Donaghy swore other officials were involved. The FBI was so mad the NBA didn't let him bust other refs. Why would they not want to stamp out every single crooked official? Because it would ruin the reputation of the league. Fans would think, I guess every game is fixed, what's the point of watching? And even if Scott Foster was guilty, the NBA couldn't just fire him. It would look like they knew what was up. But I am not saying that Scott Foster did anything. But it is suspicious, and the NBA tells us there's nothing to see here without any real explanation. In 2007, a study saying that NBA refs have a racial bias was front page of the New York Times. It said white refs are more likely to call fouls against black players. The NBA immediately called the study sloppy and said racism does not exist in the NBA. So they hired their own law firm to do a different study to investigate racist refs. Obviously, the league's study said there's no problem, no racism. But the NBA then hired that investigator who did their study full time. And what does he do now? He is the senior vice president of referee ops and analytics. So the man who may have covered up the racism is now in charge of deciding if Ben Taylor has a grudge against Fred VanVleet. What? I know refs do the best they can, but NBA calls are subjective and NBA officials are human. Behind the scenes, the NBA does do a lot to make officiating better. They grade every ref, put out the last 2-minute report for transparency. Adam Silver says the NBA does punish bad refs, they just don't tell us what the punishment is. The bigger controversy is the NBA's history of covering for officials to make the league look good. But the problem is we all have eyes, and so do the players. If we can all see there's an obvious issue, it makes the NBA look even worse for covering it up. But I said that James Harden accused Scott Foster of having a personal vendetta against him. That's back when he was on the Houston Rockets. Probably not a coincidence that Chris Paul was on Harden's team and they lost all those playoff games to the Warriors, but whatever. Now a rumor says that James Harden might actually want to go back to Houston. I know it seems crazy because the Sixers are winning, Joel Embiid's his teammate, but if his plan comes together, he'll go back to Houston with another superstar, not Chris Paul, but somebody else. Check it out.